Good evening, everybody. This is Rinpoche, and tonight we are here to finish Siddhartha. I'm going to be a little sad to finish this book, and again, I didn't look forward, so I don't know how it's going to end. I assume that those of you who are older than 30 may have read this many years ago, and you know the end, but don't tell me, okay? So I hope everyone had a lovely day. It's very quiet here at Lotus Lake, and our temple looks absolutely beautiful. I wish you were here to join us, and we are just hoping that things will be in good shape so that summer retreat will go on as planned. Right now, we're actually thinking of having an online weekend retreat. You might hear about it this coming week. So we'll see. Other people are doing it. We thought, oh, this might be a good idea for us also. So I'll actually be teaching. So this is the last portion of Siddhartha, and however long it goes, we're going to finish it. This is the chapter called The Sun. As you remember, his love of his life, Kamala, passed away due to a snake bite right there at the river, and Siddhartha and Vasudeva attended her, and they have buried her, and the son remains behind, his son. Frightened and weeping, the boy had attended his mother's burial. Frightened and gloomy, he had listened to Siddhartha, greeting him as his son and making him welcome in Vasudeva's hut. For days on end, he sat with a pale face on the hill of the dead, looked away, locked his heart, fought and strove against his fate. Siddhartha treated him with consideration and left him alone, for he respected his grief. Siddhartha understood that his son did not know him, that he could not love him as a father. Slowly, he also saw and realized that the 11-year-old child was a spoilt mother's boy and had been brought up in the habits of the rich, that he was accustomed to fine food and a soft bed, accustomed to commanding servants. Siddhartha understood that the spoilt and grieving boy could not so suddenly be content in a strange and poor place. He did not press him. He did a great deal for him, and always saved the best morsels for him. Slowly, by friendly patience, he hoped to win him over. He had considered himself rich and happy when the boy had come to him, but as time passed and the boy remained unfriendly and sulky, when he proved arrogant and defiant, when he would do no work, when he showed no respect to the old people and robbed Vasudeva's fruit trees, Siddhartha began to realize that no happiness and peace had come to him with his son, only sorrow and trouble. But he loved him and preferred the sorrow and trouble of his love rather than happiness and pleasure without the boy. Since young Siddhartha was in the hut, the old men had shared the work. Vasudeva had taken over all the work at the ferry, and Siddhartha, in order to be with his son, the work in the hut and the fields. For many months, Siddhartha waited patiently in the hope that his son would come to understand him, that he would accept his love, and that he would perhaps return it. For many months, Vasudeva observed this, waited, and was silent. One day, when young Siddhartha was distressing his father with his defiance and temper and had broken both rice bowls, Vasudeva took his friend aside in the evening and talked to him. Forgive me, he said, I am speaking to you as my friend. I can see that you are worried and unhappy. Your son, my dear friend, is troubling you and also me. The young bird is accustomed to a different life, to a different nest. He did not run away from riches and the town with a feeling of nausea and disgust as you did. He has had to leave all these things against his will. I have asked the river, my friend. I have asked it many times. And the river laughed. It laughed at me, and it laughed at you. It shook itself with laughter at our folly. Water will go to water, youth to youth. Your son will not be happy in this place. You ask the river and listen to what it says. Troubled, Siddhartha looked at the kind face in which there were many good-natured wrinkles. How can I part from him? He said softly. Give me time yet, my friend. I am fighting for him. I am trying to reach his heart. I will win him over with love and patience. The river will also talk to him someday. He is also called. Vasudeva's smile became warmer. Oh yes, he said, he is also called. He also belongs to the everlasting life. But do you and I know to what he is called? To which path? Which deeds? Which sorrows? His sorrows will not be slight. His heart is proud and hard. He will probably suffer much, make many mistakes, do much injustice, and commit many sins. Tell me, my friend, are you educating your son? Is he obedient to you? Do you strike him or punish him? No, Vasudeva, I do not do any of these things. I knew it. You are not strict with him. You do not punish him. You do not command him, because you know that gentleness is stronger than severity, that water is stronger than rock, that love is stronger than force. Very good. I praise you. But is it not perhaps a mistake on your part not to be strict with him, not to punish him? Do you not chain him with your love? Do you not shame him daily with your goodness and patience and make it still more difficult for him? Do you not compel this arrogant, spoiled boy to live in a hut with 2 old banana eaters, to whom even rice is a dainty, whose thoughts cannot be the same as his, whose hearts are old and quiet and beat differently from his? Is he not constrained and punished by all of this? Siddhartha looked at the ground in perplexity. What do you think I should do? He asked softly. Vasudeva said, take him into the town. Take him to his mother's house. There will still be servants there. Take him to them. And if they are no longer there, take him to a teacher, not just for the sake of education, but so that he can meet other boys and girls and be in the world to which he belongs. Have you never thought about it? You can see into my heart, said Siddhartha sadly. I have often thought about this. But how will he, who is so hard-hearted, go on in the world? Will he not consider himself superior? Will he not lose himself in pleasure and power? Will he not repeat all of his father's mistakes? Will he not perhaps be quite lost in samsara? The ferryman smiled again. He touched Siddhartha's arm gently and said, ask the river about it, my friend. Listen to it. Laugh about it. Do you then really think that you have committed your follies in order to spare your son then? Can you then protect your son from samsara? How? Through instruction, through prayer, through exhortation? My dear friend, have you forgotten that instructive story about Siddhartha, the Brahmin's son, which you once told me here? Who protected Siddhartha, the samana, from samsara, from sin, greed, and folly? Could his father's piety, his teacher's exhortations, his own knowledge, his own seeking protect him? Which father, which teacher could prevent him from living his own life, from soiling himself with life, from loading himself with sin, from swallowing the bitter drink himself, from finding his own path? Do you think, my dear friend, that anybody is spared this path? Perhaps your little son, because you would like to see him spared sorrow and pain and disillusionment. But if you were to die 10 times for him, you would not alter his destiny in the slightest. Never had Vasudeva talked so much. Siddhartha thanked him in a friendly fashion, went troubled to his hut, but he could not sleep. Vasudeva had not told him anything that he had not already thought and known himself. But stronger than his knowledge was his love for the boy, his devotion, his fear of losing him. Had he ever lost his heart to anybody so completely? Had he ever loved anybody so much, so blindly, so painfully, so hopelessly, and yet so happily? Siddhartha could not take his friend's advice. He could not give up his son. He allowed the boy to command him, to be disrespectful to him. He was silent and waited. He began daily the mute battle of friendliness and patience. Vasudeva was also silent and waited, friendly, understanding, forbearing. They were both masters of patience. Once when the boy's face reminded him of Kamala, Siddhartha suddenly remembered something she had once said to him a long time ago. "You cannot love," she had said to him, and he had agreed with her. He had compared himself with a star and other people with falling leaves, and yet he had felt some reproach in her words. It was true that he had never fully lost himself in another person to such an extent as to forget himself. He had never undergone the follies of love for another person. He had never been able to do this, and it had then seemed to him that this was the biggest difference between him and the ordinary people. But now, since his son was there, he, Siddhartha, had become completely like one of the people, through sorrow, through loving. He was madly in love, a fool because of love. Now he also experienced belatedly, for once in his life, the strongest and strangest passion. He suffered tremendously through it, and yet was uplifted, in some way, renewed and richer. He felt indeed that this love, this blind love for his son, was a very human passion, and that it was samsara, a troubled spring of deep water. At the same time, he felt that it was not worthless, that it was necessary, and that it came from his own nature. This emotion, this pain, these follies, also had to be experienced. In the meantime, his son let him commit his follies, let him strive, let him be humbled by his moods. There was nothing about this father that attracted him, and nothing that he feared. This father was a good man, a kind, gentle man, perhaps a pious man, perhaps a holy man. But all these were not qualities that could win the boy. The father who kept him in this wretched hut bored him, and when he answered his rudeness with a smile, every insult with friendliness, every naughtiness with kindness, that was the most hateful cunning of the old fox. The boy would have much preferred him to threaten him, to ill-treat him. A day came when young Siddhartha said what was in his mind and openly turned against his father. The latter had told him to gather some twigs, but the boy did not leave the hut, but stood there defiant and angry, stamped on the ground, clenched his fists, and forcibly declared his hatred and contempt in his father's face. "Bring your own twigs," he shouted, foaming. "I am not your servant. I know that you do not beat me. You dare not. I know, however, that you continually punish me and make me feel small with your piety and indulgence. You want me to become like you, so pious, so gentle, so wise, but just to spite you, I would rather become a thief and a murderer and go to hell than be like you. I hate you. You are not my father, even if you have been my mother's lover a dozen times." Full of rage and misery, he found an outlet in a stream of wild and angry words at his father. Then the boy ran away and only returned late in the evening. The following morning, he had disappeared. A small, two-colored basket made of bast, in which the ferryman kept the copper and silver coins, which they received as their payment, had also disappeared. The boat, too, had gone. Siddhartha saw it on the other side of the bank. The boy had run away. "I must follow him," said Siddhartha, who had been in great distress since the boy's hard words of the previous day. "A child cannot go through the forest alone. He will come to some harm. We must make a raft, Vasudeva, in order to cross the river." "We will make a raft," said Vasudeva, "in order to fetch our boat, which the boy took away. But let him go, my friend. He is not a child anymore. He knows how to look after himself. He is seeking the way to the town, and he is right. Do not forget that. He is doing what you yourself have neglected to do. He is looking after himself. He is going his own way. Oh, Siddhartha, I can see you are suffering pain over which one should laugh, over which you will soon laugh yourself." Siddhartha did not reply. Excuse me. He already held the hatchet in his hand and began to build a raft from bamboo. And Vasudeva helped him to bind the cane together with grass rope. Then they sailed across, were driven far out, but directed the raft upstream to the other bank. "Why have you brought the hatchet with you?" asked Siddhartha. Vasudeva said, "It is possible that the oar of our boat is lost." But Siddhartha knew what his friend was thinking. Probably that the boy would have thrown the oar away or broken it out of revenge and to prevent their following him. And indeed, there was no longer an oar in the boat. Vasudeva indicated the bottom of the boat and smiled at his friend as if to say, "Do you not see what your son wishes to say? Do you not see that he does not wish to be followed?" But he did not say it in words and started to make a new oar. Siddhartha took leave of him to look for the boy. Vasudeva did not hinder him. Siddhartha had been in the forest a long time when the thought occurred to him that his search was useless. Either he thought the boy had long ago left the wood and reached the town, or if he were still on the way, he would hide from his pursuer. And when he reflected further, he found that he was not troubled by his son, that inwardly he knew that he had neither come to any harm nor was threatened with danger in the forest. Nevertheless, he went on steadily, no longer to save him, but with a desire perhaps to see him again, and he walked up to the outskirts of the town. When he reached the wide road near the town, he stood still at the entrance to the beautiful pleasure garden that had once belonged to Kamala, where he had once seen her in a sedan chair for the first time. The past rose before his eyes. Once again, he saw himself standing there, a young, bearded, naked samana, his hair full of dust. Siddhartha stood there a long time and looked through the open gate into the garden. He saw monks walking about under the beautiful trees. He stood there for a long time, thinking, seeing pictures, seeing the story of his life. He stood there a long time, looking at the monks, saw in their place the young Siddhartha and Kamala walking beneath the tall trees. Clearly, he saw himself attended by Kamala and receiving her first kiss. He saw how he had arrogantly and contemptuously looked back on his samana days, how he had proudly and eagerly began his worldly life. He saw Kamaswami, the servants, the banquets, the dice players, the musicians. He saw Kamala's songbird in its cage. He lived it all over again, breathed samsara, was again old and tired, again felt nausea and the desire to die, again heard the holy Om. After he had stood for a long time at the gate to the garden, Siddhartha realized that the desire that had driven him to this place was foolish, that he could not help his son, that he should not force himself on him. He felt a deep love for the runaway boy, like a wound, and yet felt at the same time that this wound was not intended to fester in him, but that it should heal. Because the wound did not heal during that hour, he was sad. In place of the goal which had brought him here after his son, there was only emptiness. Sadly, he sat down. He felt something die in his heart. He saw no more happiness, no goal. He sat there depressed and waited. He had learned this from the river, to wait, to have patience, to listen. He sat and listened in the dusty road, listened to his heart, which beat wearily and sadly, and waited for a voice. He crouched there and listened for many hours, saw no more visions, sank into emptiness, and let himself sink without seeing a way out. And when he felt the wound smarting, he whispered the word, Om, filled himself with Om. The monks in the garden saw him, and as he crouched there for many hours, and the dust collected on his gray hairs. One of the monks came toward him and placed 2 bananas in front of him. The old man did not see him. A hand touched his shoulder, awakened him from his trance. He rose and greeted Vasudeva, who had followed him. When he saw Vasudeva's kind face, looking at his little laughter wrinkles into his bright eyes, he smiled also. He now saw the bananas lying near him. He picked them up, gave one to the ferryman, and ate the other. Then he went silently with Vasudeva through the wood again, back to the ferry. Neither spoke of what had happened, neither mentioned the boy's name, neither spoke of his flight, nor of the wound. Siddhartha went to his bed in the hut, and when Vasudeva went to him after a time to offer him some coconut milk, he found him asleep. The chapter is called Om. The wound smarted for a long time. Siddhartha took many travelers across the river who had a son or a daughter with them, and he could not see any of them without envying them, thinking, so many people possess this great happiness, why not I? Even wicked people, thieves and robbers, have children, love them, and are loved by them, except me. So childishly and illogically did he now reason. So much had he become like ordinary people. He now regarded people in a different light than he had previously. Not very clever, not very proud, and therefore all the more warm, curious, and sympathetic. When he now took the usual kind of travelers across, businessmen, soldiers, and women, they no longer seemed alien to him as they once had. He did not understand or share their thoughts and views, but he shared with them life's urges and desires. Although he had reached a high stage of self-discipline and bore his last wound well, he now felt as if these ordinary people were his brothers. Their vanities, desires, and trivialities no longer seemed absurd to him. They had become understandable, lovable, and even worthy of respect. There was the blind love of a mother for her child, the blind, foolish pride of a fond father for his only son, the blind, eager strivings of a young, vain woman for ornament, and the admiration of men. All these little, simple, foolish, but tremendously strong, vital, passionate urges and desires no longer seemed trivial to Siddhartha. For their sake, he saw people live and do great things, travel, conduct wars, suffer, and endure immensely, and he loved them for it. He saw life, vitality, the indestructible and Brahman in all their desires and needs. These people were worthy of love and admiration in their blind loyalty, in their blind strength and tenacity, with the exception of one small thing, one tiny little thing. They lacked nothing that the sage and thinker had, and that was the consciousness of the unity of all life. And many a time Siddhartha even doubted whether this knowledge, this thought, was of such great value, whether it was not also perhaps the childish self-flattery of thinkers who were perhaps only thinking children. The men of the world were equal to the thinkers in every other respect, and often superior to them, just as animals in their tenacious undeviating actions in cases of necessity may often seem superior to human beings. Within Siddhartha, there slowly grew and ripened the knowledge of what wisdom really was and the goal of his long seeking. It was nothing but a preparation of the soul, a capacity, a secret art of thinking, feeling and breathing thoughts of unity at every moment of life. This thought matured in him slowly, and it was reflected in Vasudeva's old childlike face. Harmony, knowledge of the eternal perfection of the world, and unity. But the wound still smarted. Siddhartha thought yearningly and bitterly about his son, nursed his love and feelings of tenderness toward him, let the pain gnaw at him, underwent all the follies of love. The flames did not extinguish itself. One day, when the wound was smarting terribly, Siddhartha rowed across the river, consumed by longing, and got out of the boat with the purpose of going to the town to seek his son. The river flowed softly and gently. It was in the dry season, but its voice rang out strangely. It was laughing. It was distinctly laughing. The river was laughing clearly and merrily at the old ferryman. Siddhartha stood still. He bent over the water in order to hear better. He saw his face reflected in the quietly moving water, and there was something in this reflection that reminded him of something he had forgotten, and when he reflected on it, he remembered. His face resembled that of another person whom he had once known and loved and even feared. It resembled the face of his father, the Brahmin. He remembered how once, as a youth, he had compelled his father to let him go and join the ascetics, how he had taken leave of him, how he had gone and never returned. Had not his own father also suffered the same pain that he now suffering for his son? Had not his father died long ago, alone without having seen his son again? Did he not expect the same fare? Was it not a comedy, a strange and stupid thing, this repetition, this course of events in a fateful circle? The river laughed. Yes, that was how it was. Everything that was not suffered to the end and finally concluded recurred, and the same sorrows were undergone. Siddhartha climbed into the boat again and rowed back to the hut, thinking of his father, thinking of his son, laughed at by the river, in conflict with himself, verging on despair, and no less inclined to laugh aloud at himself and the whole world. The wound still smarted. He still rebelled against his fate. There was still no serenity and conquest of this suffering. Yet he was hopeful, and when he returned to the hut, he was filled with an unconquerable desire to confess to Vasudeva, to disclose everything, to tell everything to the man who knew the art of listening. Vasudeva sat in the hut weaving a basket. He no longer worked the ferry boat. His eyes were becoming weak, also his arms and hands. But unchanged and radiant were the happiness and the serene well-being in his face. Siddhartha sat down beside the old man and slowly began to speak. He told him now what he had never mentioned before. how he had gone to the town that time, of his smarting wound, of his envy at the sight of happy fathers, of his knowledge of the folly of such feelings, of his hopeless struggle with himself. He mentioned everything. He could tell him everything, even the most painful things. He could disclose everything. He displayed his wound, told him of his flight that day, how he had rowed across the river with the object of wandering into the town, and how the river had laughed. As he went on speaking, and Vasudeva listened to him with a serene face, Siddhartha was more keenly aware than ever of Vasudeva's attentiveness. He felt his troubles, his anxieties, and his secret hopes flow across to him and then return to him. Disclosing his wound to this listener was the same as bathing it in the river until it became cool and one with the river. As he went on talking and confessing, Siddhartha felt more and more that this was no longer Vasudeva, no longer a man who was listening to him. He felt that this motionless listener was absorbing his confession as a tree absorbs the rain, that this motionless man was the river itself, that he was God himself, that he was eternity itself. As Siddhartha stopped thinking about himself and his wound, this recognition of the change in Vasudeva possessed him. And the more he realized it, the less strange did he find it. The more did he realize that everything was natural and in order, that Vasudeva had long ago almost always been like that, only he did not quite recognize it. Indeed, he himself was hardly different from him. He felt that he now regarded Vasudeva as the people regard the gods, and that this could not last. Inwardly, he began to take leave of Vasudeva. In the meantime, he went on talking. When he had finished talking, Vasudeva directed his somewhat weakened glance at him. He did not speak, but his face silently radiated love and serenity, understanding and knowledge. He took Siddhartha's hand, led him to the seat on the riverbank, sat down beside him, and smiled at the river. "You have heard it laugh," he said, "but you have not heard everything. Let us listen. You will hear more." They listened. The many-voiced song of the river echoed softly. Siddhartha looked into the river and saw many pictures in the flowing water. He saw his father, lonely, mourning for his son. He saw himself lonely, also with the bonds of longing for his faraway son. He saw his son, also lonely, the boy eagerly advancing along the burning path of life's desires, each one concentrating on his goal, each one obsessed with by his goal, each one suffering. The river's voice was sorrowful. It sang with yearning and sadness, flowing toward its goal. "Do you hear?" asked Vasudeva's mute glance. Siddhartha nodded. "Listen better," whispered Vasudeva. Siddhartha tried to listen better. The pictures of his father, his own pictures, and the picture of his son all flowed one into each other. Kamala's picture also appeared and flowed on, and the picture of Govinda and others emerged and passed on. They all became part of the river. It was the goal of all of them, yearning, desiring, suffering. And the river's voice was full of longing, full of smarting woe, full of insatiable desire. The river flowed on toward its goal. Siddhartha saw the river hasten, made up of himself and his relatives and all of the people he had ever seen. All the waves and the water hastened, suffering toward goals, many goals, to the waterfall, to the sea, to the current, to the ocean. And all goals were reached, and each one was succeeded by another. The water changed to vapor and rose, became rain, and came down again, became spring, brook, and river, changed anew, flowed anew. But the yearning voice had altered. It still echoed sorrowfully, searchingly, but other voices accompanied it. Voices of pleasure and sorrow, good and evil voices, laughing and lamenting voices, hundreds of voices, thousands of voices. Siddhartha listened. He was now listening intently, completely absorbed, quite empty, taking in everything. He felt that he had now completely learned the art of listening. He had often heard all this before, all these numerous voices in the river, but today they sounded different. He could no longer distinguish the different voices, the merry voice from the weeping voice, the childish voice from the manly voice. They all belonged to each other. The lament of those who yearn, the laughter of the wise, the cry of the indignation, and the groan of the dying. They were all interwoven and interlocked, entwined in 1,000 ways. And all the voices, all the goals, all the yearnings, all the sorrows, all the pleasures, all the good and evil, all of them together was the world. All of them together was the stream of events, the music of life. When Siddhartha listened attentively to this river, to this song of 1,000 voices, when he did not listen to the sorrow or the laughter, when he did not bind his soul to any one particular voice and absorb it into his self, but heard them all, the whole, the unity, then the great song of 1,000 voices consisted of one word, Om, perfection. Do you hear? Asked Vasudeva's glance over again. Vasudeva's smile was radiant. It hovered brightly in all the wrinkles of his old face as the Om hovered over all the voices of the river. His smile was radiant as he looked at his friend. And now the same smile appeared on Siddhartha's face. His wound was healing, his pain was dispersing. His self had merged into unity. From that hour, Siddhartha ceased to fight against his destiny. There shone in his face the serenity of knowledge, of one who is no longer confronted with the conflict of desires, who has found salvation, who is in harmony with the stream of events, with the stream of life, full of sympathy and compassion, surrendering himself to the stream, belonging to the unity of all things. As Vasudeva rose from the seat on the riverbank, when he looked into Siddhartha's eyes and saw the serenity of knowledge shining in them, he touched his shoulder gently in his kind, protective way and said, "I have waited for this hour, my friend. Now that it has arrived, let me go. I have been Vasudeva, the ferryman, for a long time. Now it is over. Farewell, hut. Farewell, river. Farewell, Siddhartha." Siddhartha bowed low before the departing man. "I knew it," he said softly. "Are you going into the woods?" "Yes, I am going into the woods. I am going into the unity of all things," said Vasudeva, radiant. And so he went away. Siddhartha watched him. With great joy and gravity, he watched him, saw his steps full of peace, his face glowing, his form full of light. One more chapter. Govinda. Govinda once spent a rest period with some other monks in the pleasure grove in which Kamala, the courtesan, had once presented to the followers of Gautama. He heard talk of an old ferryman who lived by the river a day's journey away, and whom many considered to be a sage. When Govinda moved on, he chose the path to the ferry, eager to see this ferryman. For although he had lived his life according to the rule and was also regarded with respect by the younger monks for his age and modesty, there was still restlessness in his heart, and his seeking was unsatisfied. He arrived at the river and asked the old man to take him across. When they climbed out of the boat to the other side, he said to the old man, "You show much kindness to the monks and pilgrims. You have taken many of us across. Are you not also a seeker of the right path?" There was a smile in Siddhartha's old eyes as he said, "Do you call yourself a seeker, O venerable one, you who are already advanced in years and wear the robe of Gautama's monks?" "I am indeed old," said Govinda, "but I have never ceased seeking. I will never cease seeking. That seems to be my destiny. It seems to me that you also have sought. Will you talk to me a little about it, my friend?" Siddhartha said, "What could I say to you that would be of value except perhaps you seek too much? That as a result of your seeking, you cannot find." "How is that?" asked Govinda. "When someone is seeking," said Siddhartha, "it happens quite easily that he only sees the thing that he is seeking, that he is unable to find anything, unable to absorb anything, because he is only thinking of the thing he is seeking, because he has a goal, because he is obsessed with his goal. Seeking means to have a goal, but finding means to be free, to be receptive, to have no goal. You, O worthy ones, are perhaps indeed a seeker, for in striving toward your goal, you do not see many things that are under your nose." "I do not yet quite understand," said Govinda. How do you mean?" Siddhartha said, "Once, O worthy one, many years ago, you came to this river and found a man sleeping there. You sat beside him to guard him while he slept, but you did not recognize the sleeping man, Govinda." Astonished, like one bewitched, the monk gazed at the ferryman. "Are you Siddhartha?" he asked in a timid voice. "I did not recognize you this time too." I'm very pleased to see you again, Siddhartha, very pleased. You have changed very much, my friend. And have you become a ferryman now? Siddhartha laughed warmly. Yes, I have become a ferryman. Many people have to change a great deal and wear all sorts of clothes. I am one of those, my friend. You are very welcome, Govinda, and I invite you to stay the night in my hut. Govinda stayed the night in the hut and slept in the bed that had once been Vasudeva's. He asked the friend of his youth many questions, and Siddhartha had a great deal to tell him about his life. When it was time for Govinda to depart the following morning, he said with some hesitation, "Before I go on my way, Siddhartha, I should like to ask you one more question. Have you a doctrine, a belief, knowledge which you uphold, which helps you to live and do right?" Siddhartha said, "You know, my friend, that even as a young man, when we lived with the ascetics in the forest, I came to distrust doctrines and teachers and to turn my back on them. I am still of the same turn of mind, although I have, since that time, had many teachers. A beautiful courtesan was my teacher for a long time, and a rich merchant, and a dice player. On one occasion, one of the Buddha's wandering monks was my teacher. He halted in his pilgrimage to sit beside me when I fell asleep in the forest. I also learned something from him, and I am grateful to him, very grateful. But most of all, I have learned from this river and from my predecessor, Vasudeva. He was a simple man. He was not a thinker. But he realized the essential as well as Gautama. He was a holy man, a saint." Govinda said, "It seems to me, Siddhartha, that you still like to jest a little. I believe you, and I know that you have not followed any teacher, but have you not yourself, if not a doctrine, certain thoughts? Have you not discovered certain knowledge yourself that have helped you to live? It would give me great pleasure if you would tell me something about this." Siddhartha said, "Yes, I have had thoughts and knowledge here and there, sometimes for an hour or for a day. I have become aware of this knowledge, just as one feels life in one's heart. I have had many thoughts, but it would be difficult for me to tell you about them. But this is one thought that has impressed me, Govinda. Wisdom is not communicable. The wisdom with which a wise man tries to communicate always sounds foolish." "Are you jesting?" asked Govinda. "No, I'm telling you what I have discovered. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. One can find it, live it, be fortified by it, do wonders through it, but one cannot communicate and teach it. I suspected this when I was still a youth, and it was this that drove me away from teachers. There is one thought I have had, Govinda, which you will again think is a jest or folly. That is, in every truth, the opposite is equally true. For example, a truth can only be expressed and enveloped in words if it is one-sided. Everything that is thought and expressed in words is one-sided, only half the truth. It all lacks totality, completeness, unity. When the illustrious Buddha taught about the world, he had to divide it into samsara and nirvana, into illusion and truth, into suffering and salvation. One cannot do otherwise. There is no other method for those who teach. But the world itself, being in and around us, is never one-sided. Never is a man or a deed wholly samsara or wholly nirvana. Never is a man wholly a saint or a sinner. This only seems so because we suffer the illusion that time is something real. Time is not real, Govinda. I have realized this repeatedly. And if time is not real, then the dividing line that seems to lie between this world and eternity, between suffering and bliss, between good and evil, is also an illusion. How is that? Asked Govinda, puzzled. Listen, my friend. I am a sinner and you are a sinner, but someday the sinner will be Brahma again. Some will someday attain nirvana, will someday become a Buddha. Now this someday is illusion, but it is only a comparison. The sinner is not on the way to a Buddhahood state. He is not evolving, although our thinking cannot conceive things otherwise. No, the potential Buddha already exists in this sinner. His future is already there. The potential hidden Buddha must be recognized in him, in you, in everybody. The world, Govinda, is not imperfect or slowly evolving along a long path to perfection. No, it is perfect at every moment. Every sin already carries grace within it. All small children are potential old men. All sucklings have death within them. All dying people, eternal life. It is not possible for one person to see how far another is on the way. The Buddha exists in the robber and dice player. The robber exists in the Brahmin. During deep meditation, it is possible to dispel time, to see simultaneously all the past, present, and future. And then everything is good, everything is perfect, everything is Brahman. Therefore, it seems to me that everything that exists is good, death as well as life, sin as well as holiness, wisdom as well as folly. Everything is necessary. Everything needs only my agreement, my assent, my loving understanding. Then all is well with me, and nothing can harm me. I learned through my body and soul that it was necessary for me to sin, that I needed lust, that I had to strive for property and experience nausea and the depths of despair in order to learn not to resist them. In order to learn to love the world and no longer compare it with some kind of desired imagery world, some imaginary vision of perfection, but to leave it as it is, to love it and be glad to belong to it. These, Govinda, are some of the thoughts that are in my mind. Siddhartha bent down, lifted a stone from the ground, and held it in his hand. This, he said, handling it, is a stone, and within a certain length of time, it will perhaps be soil, and from the soil it will become plant, animal, or man. Previously, I should have said, this stone is just a stone. It has no value. It belongs to the world of Maya, but perhaps within the cycle of change, it can also become man and spirit. It is also of importance. That is what I should have thought. But now I think, this stone is stone. It is also animal, God and Buddha. I do not respect and love it because it was one thing and will become something else, but because it has already long been everything and always is everything. I love it just because it is a stone, because today and now it appears to me a stone. I see value and meaning in each one of its fine markings and cavities, in the yellow, in the gray, in the hardness, and the sound of it when I knock it, in the dryness or dampness of its surface. There are stones that feel like oil or soap, that look like leaves or sand, and each one is different and worships Om in its own way. Each one is Brahman. At the same time, it is very much stone, oily or soapy, and that is just what pleases me and seems wonderful and worthy of worship. But I will say no more about it. Words do not express thoughts very well. They always become a little different immediately as they are expressed, a little distorted, a little foolish. And yet, it also pleases me and seems right that what is of value and wisdom to one man seems nonsense to another. Govinda had listened in silence. "Why did you tell me about the stone?" he asked hesitatingly after a pause. "I did so unintentionally, but perhaps it illustrates that I just love the stone and the river and all these things that we can see and from which we can learn. I can love a stone, Govinda, and a tree or a piece of bark. These are things, and one can love things, but one cannot love words. Therefore, teachings are of no use to me. They have no hardness, no softness, no colors, no corners, no smell, no taste. They have nothing but words. Perhaps that is what prevents you from finding peace. Perhaps there are too many words for even salvation and virtue. Samsara and nirvana are only words, Govinda. Nirvana is not a thing. There is only the word nirvana." Govinda said, "Nirvana is not only a word, my friend, it is a thought." Siddhartha continued, "It may be a thought, but I must confess, my friend, that I do not differentiate very much between thoughts and words. Quite frankly, I do not attach great importance to thoughts either. I attach more importance to things. For example, there was a man at this ferry who was my predecessor and teacher. He was a holy man who for many years believed only in the river and nothing else. He noticed that the river's voice spoke to him. He learned from it. It educated and taught him. The river seemed like a god to him, and for many years he did not know that every wind, every cloud, every bird, every beetle is equally divine. And he knows and can teach just as well as the esteemed river. But when this holy man went off into the woods, he knew everything. He knew more than you and I, without teachers, without books, just because he believed in the river." Govinda said, "But what you call thing, is it something real, something intrinsic? Is it not only the illusion of Maya, only image and appearance? Your stone, your tree, are they real?" "This does not trouble me much. Also," said Siddhartha, "if they are illusions, then I also am an illusion. And so they are also of the same nature as myself. It is that which makes them so lovable and venerable. That is why I can love them." And here is the doctrine at which you will laugh. It seems to me, Govinda, that love is the most important thing in the world. It may be important to great thinkers to examine the world, to explain and despise it. But I think it is only important to love the world, not to despise it, not for us to hate each other, but to be able to regard the world and ourselves and all beings with love, admiration, and respect. I understand that, said Govinda, but that is just what the illustrious one calls illusion. He preached benevolence, forbearance, sympathy, patience, but not love. He forbade us to bind ourselves to earthly love. I know that, said Siddhartha, smiling radiantly. I know that, Govinda, and here we find ourselves within the maze of meanings, within the conflict of words. For I will not deny that my words about love are in apparent contradiction to the teachings of Gautama. That is just why I distrust words so much. For I know that this contradiction is an illusion. I know that I am at one with Gautama. How indeed could he not know love? He who has recognized all humanity's vanity and transitoriness, yet loves humanity so much that he has devoted a long life solely to help and teach people. Also with this great teacher, the thing to me is of great importance that the words, his deeds and life are more important to me than his opinions. Not in speech or thought do I regard him as a great man, but in his deeds and life. The two old men were silent for a long time. Then, as Govinda was preparing to go, he said, I thank you, Siddhartha, for telling me something of your thoughts. Some of them are strange thoughts. I cannot grasp them all immediately. However, I thank you, and I wish you many peaceful days. Inwardly, however, he thought, Siddhartha is a strange man, and he expresses strange thoughts. His ideas seem crazy. How different do the illustrious one's doctrines sound? They are clear, straightforward, comprehensible. They contain nothing strange, wild, or laughable. But Siddhartha's hands and feet, his eyes, his brow, his breathing, his smile, his greetings, his gait affect me differently from his thoughts. Never since the time our illustrious Gautama passed into nirvana, have I ever met a man, with the exception of Siddhartha, about whom I felt, this is a holy man. His ideas may be strange, his words may sound foolish, but his glance and his hand, his skin and his hair, all radiate a purity, peace, serenity, gentleness, and saintliness, which I have never seen in any man since the recent death of our illustrious teacher. While Govinda was thinking these thoughts, and there was conflict in his heart, he again bowed to Siddhartha, full of affection toward him. He bowed low before the quietly seated man. Siddhartha, he said, we are now old men. We may never see each other again in this life. I can see, my dear friend, that you have found peace. I realize that I have not found it. Tell me one more word, my esteemed friend. Tell me something that I can conceive, something that I can understand. Give me something to help me on my way, Siddhartha. My path is often hard and dark. Siddhartha was silent and looked at him with his calm, peaceful smile. Govinda looked steadily into his face with anxiety, with longing. Suffering, continual seeking, and continual failure were written in his look. Siddhartha saw it and smiled. "Bend near me," he whispered into Govinda's ear. "Come, sit nearer, quite close. Kiss me on the forehead, Govinda." Although surprised, Govinda was compelled by a great love and presentiment to obey him. He leaned close to him and touched his forehead with his lips. As he did, something wonderful happened to him. While he was still dwelling on Siddhartha's strange words, while he strove in vain to dispel the conception of time, to imagine nirvana and samsara as one, even a certain contempt for his friend's words conflicted with a tremendous love and esteem for him. This happened to him. He no longer saw the face of his friend Siddhartha. Instead, he saw other faces, many faces, a long series, a continuous stream of faces, hundreds, thousands, which all came and disappeared, and yet all seemed to be there at the same time, which all continually changed and renewed themselves, and which were yet all Siddhartha. He saw the face of a fish, of a carp, with tremendously painfully opened mouth, a dying fish with dimmed eyes. He saw the face of a newly born child, red and full of wrinkles, ready to cry. He saw the face of a murderer, saw him plunge a knife into the body of a man. At the same moment, he saw this criminal kneeling down, bound, and his head cut off by an executioner. He saw the naked bodies of men and women in the postures and transports of passionate love. He saw corpses stretching out, still, cold, empty. He saw the heads of animals, boars, crocodiles, elephants, oxen, birds. He saw Krishna and Agni. He saw all of these forms and faces in 1,000 relationships to each other, all helping each other, loving, hating, and destroying each other, and becoming newly born. Each one was mortal, a passionate, painful example of all that is transitory. Yet none of them died. They only changed, were always reborn, continually having a new face. Only time stood between one face and another. And all these forms and faces rested, flowed, reproduced, swam past, and merged into each other. And over them, all there was continually something thin, unreal, and yet existing, stretched across like thin glass or ice, like a transparent skin, shell, form, or mask of water. And this mask was Siddhartha's smiling face, which Govinda touched with his lips at that moment. And Govinda saw this mask-like smile, this smile of unity over the flowing forms, this smile of simultaneousness over the thousands of births and deaths. This smile of Siddhartha was exactly the same as the calm, delicate, impenetrable, perhaps gracious, perhaps mocking, wise, thousand-fold smile of Gautama the Buddha, as he perceived it with awe 100 times. It was in such a manner Govinda knew that the perfect one smiled. No longer knowing whether time existed, whether this display had lasted a second or 100 years, whether there was a Siddhartha or a Gautama, a self and others, wounded deeply by a divine arrow which gave him pleasure, deeply enchanted and exalted, Govinda stood yet a while, bending over Siddhartha's peaceful face, which he had just kissed, which had just been the stage of all present and future forms. His countenance was unchanged after the mirror of the thousandfold forms had disappeared from the surface. He smiled peacefully and gently, perhaps very graciously, perhaps very mockingly, exactly as the illustrious one had smiled. Govinda bowed low. Incontrollable tears trickled down his old face. He was overwhelmed by a feeling of great love, of the most humble veneration. He bowed low, right down to the ground, in front of the man sitting there motionless, whose smile reminded him of everything that he had ever loved in his life, of everything that had ever been of value and holy in his life. This completes our book, Siddhartha. Good evening. We'll see you tomorrow. We begin Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Good night, good night.